And there's quite a drop off to Brian
Powered by
Thomas, the rookie
Riverside
from
FM.
Jacksonville Jaguars, who had 1,282. He would have had quite a bit more than that, but the first half of the season, the Jaguars couldn't figure out how to use him properly. Welcome to Just the Stats, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. My name is Ernie J., and I am the host of this podcast. We will cover the statistical leaders of the NFL from single game leaders to career leaders. Unlike other podcasts, we'll be discussing the stats and not just the gossip surrounding the players. Though I do listen to that on the other podcasts, I wanted this one to be somewhat different because I do enjoy stats, and so that's what we'll be talking about. So who are the greatest NFL players and who are on their way to becoming one of the greats? That's what we're going to look at. This is the second episode covering the single season leaders all time. So that's what we're going to start with. If you didn't catch the first episode of the single season leaders, we covered the passers and the rushers. This time we will start with the receiving records that are held. And we'll start with receptions. Most receptions in a single season is held by Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints at the time. In 2019, he had 149 receptions. That passed the record held by Marvin Harrison, who had 143 at the time. 2 years later, Cooper Kupp came close to Michael Thomas in 2021. Cooper Kupp had 145. Not only did he have 145 receptions, he also had over 1,900 yards in receiving. So quite an achievement. We'll look at that in a little bit. So Marvin Harrison had 143 for the Indianapolis Colts in 2002. So it took 17 years before Michael Thomas broke the record. Antonio Brown in 2015 was fourth. He came close to breaking Harrison's record of 143 when he had 136 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Julio Jones in the same season had 136 receptions. That's amazing. CeeDee Lamb, 2023, had 135 receptions. Antonio Brown's on this list twice. He had 129 receptions in 2014 and topped that in 2015 with 136. So he had a period there where he was quite an astounding receiver. Stephon Diggs, when he was playing for the Bills, had 127 in 2020. He was tied by this year's top leader with Jamar Chase, who had 127 this year for the Cincinnati Bengals. So he made the top 10 list, the only player from this season to do such a thing. So there's only 3 players all time that have made it to 140 or more receptions. Then there's 3 more to make it 130 or more. Then you start to see more people making the list. There's 19 players that have 120 more receptions. When we look at the 24 season, there were 10 players that had 100 or more receptions for their season. Jamar Chase led everybody with 127. Amon-Ra St. Brown for Detroit had 115. And then Brock Bowers, leading tight end, just beating out Trey McBride for Arizona. Brock Bowers for the Raiders had 112 and McBride had 111. So they had a race the whole season. And McBride probably lost out because he played 1 fewer games than Bowers and ended up with 1 fewer receptions. It's highly likely if he'd have played 17 games as Bowers did, he probably would have passed Bowers. But still, impressive seasons for those 2 players, those 2 tight ends. Malik Neighbors had 109. They tried to throw him the ball every time they could. Only Jamar Chase had more targets. Jamar Chase had 175 targets to his 127 receptions. Malik Neighbors had 170 targets and ended up with 109 receptions. Justin Jefferson was sixth with 103. Then CeeDee Lamb and Garrett Wilson each had 101. Now, CeeDee Lamb did that 101 in 15 games. That's good. And then Drake London and Jackson Smith-Njigba each had 100. Those are your top players as far as pass receptions go for 2024. Let's look at receiving yards. The all-time leader for receiving yards is Calvin Johnson, who in 2012 for the Detroit Lions had 1,964 yards receiving. Calvin Johnson's had the record for 13 years. Cooper Kupp in 2021 had 1,947, just coming up 17 yards short of tying Calvin Johnson. So he's the one that's come the closest who's currently playing. After him, we had Julio Jones. Third, Jerry Rice, who we didn't see in the leading in receptions, even though he leads in career total for receptions, was fourth. Cooper Kupp is number 2, like I said, for active players. Justin Jefferson is sixth with 1,809 yards. Tyreek Hill is seventh with 1,799. He did that in 2023 for Miami, while Jefferson did his 1,800 yards in 2022 with Minnesota. CeeDee Lamb's another one in the top 10 of current players with 1,749. He did that in 2023. So in 2023, you had CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill both hitting for 1,700 yards, only being separated by 50 yards. There's a lot of players currently playing: Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Michael Thomas, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, who are playing currently, who are starting to hit the top 10 on this list. It's impressive. Jamar Chase just missed the top 10. He had 1,708 this year for Cincinnati. Just missing out the top 10. Charlie Hennigan, who set the record. Charlie Hennigan had 1,746 yards for the Houston Oilers in 1961. Jerry Rice finally in 1995 had his 1,848. So that's a period of 34 years that record stood before somebody finally broke it. That's impressive. The same year that Jerry Rice set the record, Isaac Bruce came in just behind him in 1995 when he was playing for St. Louis. Isaac Bruce had 1,781. So he just fell 67 yards behind Jerry Rice. So they both in 1995 passed Charlie Hennigan. But now, as we've talked about with the passing game the way it is, you're seeing a lot of players now who are starting to break the top 10. So you can see this is a record I don't think is going to stand. Calvin Johnson, even at 1,964, it's not going to stand, not for 30-something years like Charlie Hennigan did. I mean, Cooper Kupp came close. So if Cooper Kupp can do it, I'm sure there's plenty of players who are fed the ball quite regularly, like Jamar Chase. He's somebody that could do it. And there's several wide receivers that could set this record, Justin Jefferson being another one. This year, in 2024, Jamar Chase, like I said, for Cincinnati, led the NFL with 1,708 yards, which was a little bit of a space between him and Justin Jefferson, who came in second, who had 1,533. Then there's quite a drop-off to Brian Thomas, the rookie from Jacksonville Jaguars, who had 1,282. He would have had quite a bit more than that, but the first half of the season, the Jaguars couldn't figure out how to use him properly, which explains why their entire staff is now gone. But they couldn't figure that out, and took him till the second half when he really kicked it into gear and moved right up this list. Who knows if they'd have started the way they did with Malik Neighbors, how Brian Thomas might have done for the entire year if he'd have been the primary target on a regular basis. So those are the top 3. Then you had Drake London, and you have some of the regular names. Jerry Jeudy's another name on here that you wouldn't always see for Cleveland. He had 1,229. He came in 6th. There was quite a few receivers. This is one of those reasons I think the record will be broken. I mean, there were 24 receivers who had 1,000 or more yards. That's a lot. The leading tight end was Brock Bowers, who had 1,194 yards. He beat out Terry McBride for total yards in a season. This season. Those are your top wide receivers and their receptions and receiving yards. So let's move to receiving touchdowns. And again, Jamar Chase had the triple crown of receptions, yards, and TDs. And he had the lead on TDs by quite a bit with 17 receiving TDs compared to Terry McLaurin, who was second with 13 TD receptions. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 12. There was only 8 players that had 10 or more receiving touchdowns. And the only tight end that did was Mark Andrews, who didn't make the list in any other category. He had 11 touchdown receptions. He had 55 receptions, and 11 of them were touchdowns. So 1 out of every 5 receptions, he had a touchdown. Brian Thomas is up there again as far as rookies go. He was number 7. He had 10 touchdowns for Jacksonville. That's the current players this year, looking at 2024. But looking at the leaders all time, as I said, Jamar Chase had 17, but the record is held by Randy Moss, who had 23 in 2007. Jerry Rice had 22 in 1987. So it took 20 years before Randy Moss broke Jerry Rice's record of touchdowns receptions in a season. Of current players, Davante Adams is the closest to make the 20 mark. He has 18. He's number 3. Davante Adams, Mark Clayton, and Sterling Sharp all had 18 receptions in a single season. There's only 2 players, Randy Moss and Jerry Rice, that have hit the 20-plus mark with 22 and 23, respectively. The other player is Jamar Chase, making the top 10 with his 17 touchdown receptions in a single season. That ties him for 6th. And then there's a multitude of people who have 17, 16, that kind of thing. So there's really only 3 that have 18, 1 with 22, and 1 with 23. That's it. Randy Moss had the 23, set that in 2007 when Tom Brady was throwing for 50 touchdowns in a season. Randy Moss was the recipient of almost half of those 50 touchdowns. Jerry Rice, the interesting thing about him was that 1987, when he had his 22, he did that in 12 games. That was a strike-shortened season. So he had a touchdown almost 23% of his receptions were touchdowns. That's I don't know if that's going to ever be beat. That's an incredible ratio. Let's move to our next category of total touchdowns. And if you happen to catch the last episode, you will know that the leader in rushing touchdowns was LaDainian Tomlinson, which then probably explains why he's also number 1 in total touchdowns. LaDainian Tomlinson had an incredible season when he rushed for 28 touchdowns. He added 3 more for receiving touchdowns, and he ended up with 31 touchdowns, which as we get down to it will also be the record that he sets for single points in a season with 186, beating out all those kickers. But he had 31 touchdowns in 2006 for the San Diego Chargers. Sean Alexander had 28 touchdowns. 27 of them were by rushing, and then he had 1 receiving touchdown. Priest Holmes was 3rd with 27. Marshall Faulk with 26 for the Rams. Emmitt Smith with 25. And then Priest Holmes is on this list again, number 6. So Priest Holmes was 2 times the only player on the list twice in the top 10, that is. That's impressive. He had 24 one season, 27 in another season. The current active player on the list, which is quite a ways from the top, is Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey and Raheem Mostert. Each of those three have 21 touchdowns in a single season. Now, McCaffrey and Raheem Mostert both did it in 2023. I think Raheem Mostert is more of a fluke because he did it that one season, and then it was a major drop-off last year. And Christian McCaffrey obviously has been hurt a lot, so we've only seen him on this list once, even though he did hit 19 in 2019. There's been a lot of players, 35 in fact, or 35 seasons where somebody has scored 20 or more touchdowns. There's been a few people that have done it more than once. But you don't see total touchdowns like you do in the past. This is not a record that's going to be as easily broken. LaDainian set the record in 2006, so that's 19 years ago. We'll see if anybody can come close. I really doubt it. You really do need a player like him who's going to be coming out of the backfield a lot and catching a lot of passes as well as rushing for touchdowns. Saquon Barkley would have a chance, I think, if they'd have done away with a tush push and or push tush, but they didn't. So he probably will have a few touchdowns taken away by Hurt, which is all right as far as the team goes. But if you're looking for somebody to set a record, he's one that would have a possibility. All right, let's look at the touchdown total leaders for 2024. Jahmyr Gibbs did hit the 20 mark. He was the only one that did. He had 16 rushing touchdowns and 4 receiving touchdowns. James Cook had 18, as well as Derrick Henry. They both had 18, and they both had 16 rushing touchdowns as well, but only 2 receiving touchdowns apiece. And then you had Jamar Chase again, who had 17 touchdowns, all of them by receiving. So those were your top 4 leaders in total touchdowns for 2024. As you can see, they barely cracked the top 35. Jahmyr Gibbs was the only one, and no one came even close to the record held by LaDainian Tomlinson. All right, let's look at the next category, which is yards from scrimmage. And that was Saquon Barkley. For this 2024, he was the leader there with 2,283 yards from scrimmage. That's an impressive mark. Let's compare that with the all-time single-season leader, which is Chris Johnson for Tennessee in 2009, had 2,509 yards. Only one over 2,500 yards in a single season. And then Marshall Faulk had 2,429 in 1999. Christian McCaffrey was the one that came the closest. In 2019, he had 2,392. Came very close. Well, a little over 100 yards from breaking Chris Johnson's mark, but still impressive total. Then this year, Saquon Barkley cracked the top 15. He came in at 13th with 2,283 yards for the Philadelphia Eagles. That's impressive. If he'd have played the 17 games, obviously he could have moved up this list quite a ways. And in fact, if he had a spectacular game, might have even set the record. This is a tough record to break because you do have to be a multi-dimensional running back. You do have wide receivers on this list, but they fall much farther down the list than any running back would. The only other active players anywhere on the list, Jonathan Taylor in 2021 for Indianapolis Colts had 2,171 yards. And then Derrick Henry has been on this list twice, in 2020 for Tennessee and then last year for Baltimore. In 2020, he had 2,141, and then last year he had 2,114. What a model of consistency. As far as active players, even though McCaffrey's number 3 all time, that's his only position. His next position on the list is way back in 2023, he had 2,023 yards, which would put him at number 71. Same with Saquon Barkley, even though he's on this list twice. Once at 13th, but the other one was at number 68, so quite a difference. And the only other active player currently on the list is Josh Jacobs with 2,053. He did that in 2022. So not a lot of players. It's a tough list to make. You have to stay healthy the entire season. You just have to have a spectacular year to even do it. For this year in 2024, like I said, Saquon Barkley led the league with 2,283 yards, with Derrick Henry coming in second at 2,114 yards. Jahmyr Gibbs had 1,929 yards. And then you had Bijan Robinson. The first wide receiver is Jamar Chase with his 1,740 yards. So the list is primarily running backs. You had Justin Jefferson with a little over 1,500. That's the only other wide receiver. Not too many wide receivers, which is understandable. I mean, they're not out there running the ball as well as receiving. So Saquon Barkley had quite a year. Could almost say that he should have been higher up in the player of the year, but it's hard to beat out a quarterback for that. Saquon Barkley averaged 125 yards a game total. That's an impressive amount of yards per game. All right, let's look at the next category, which is total points in a single season. That is a record that is held by LaDainian Tomlinson, who had 186 points in 2006 when he scored those 31 touchdowns. A record that's going to be very hard to break, 31 touchdowns. Only player with that many. Number 2 was Paul Hornung, who had 176 points way back in 1960. So it took 46 years to break Paul Hornung's record. That's incredible. Just shows you how great a season Paul Hornung had. And what's interesting about him is that his points weren't just in one area. He had 15 touchdowns, he kicked 15 field goals, and he made 41 extra points. So he was all over the place. Shaun Alexander's third with 168 points. He did that in 2005, which was a year before LaDainian Tomlinson actually caught Paul Hornung. So Shaun Alexander almost did, but couldn't quite get there. The first kicker, and only a kicker, was David Akers for San Francisco 49ers in 2011. He had 166 points. That's the first full-time kicker on the list. Though, when you look at career leaders, kickers are top out the list by far. But that's because they can consistently, season in, season out, put up big numbers. Kickers have a good shot at setting the all-time record. Looking at the 2024, let's see who the leaders in total points were. And that would be Chris Boswell for Pittsburgh, had 158 points, which put him at number 10, tied him for number 10 all time. And then Brandon Albury had 150 points. The year before, he had 157 points. He's somebody you're going to see up here year in, year out. And a lot of these kickers, if they're consistent as he is, obviously they have a good shot at setting different records, whether it's all-time or seasonal. So those are your all-time scores in a single season. Let's look at the next category. We're going to move from all the scoring and so forth. We're going to move to defense, and we will look at the sack leaders all time. Now, we talked about this before, in that sacks had an unofficial record and an official record. So you sometimes see different numbers for this particular category, but Al Baker leads the NFL with sacks with 23, which he set in 1978 with the Detroit Lions. And he was a rookie that year. Any record set before 1982 is considered unofficial. So that's why he's number one on my list. I think that just because it was viewed by watching the film and recording the number of sacks, I still think it should be official, just because it wasn't watched live as we currently can do. But he's number one. Michael Strahan and TJ Watt, number two, with 22 and a half sacks. Michael Strahan did his, which was considered the record at the time. They discounted Al Baker's 23 sacks because it was unofficial. Michael Strahan set the record in 2001, beating out Mark Gastineau, who set the record with 22 in 1984, and was quite upset with the fact that Michael Strahan broke his record because of the way Michael Strahan broke it. A lot of people feel that Brett Favre took a dive at the end of that game, which gave Strahan one more sack, and that gave Michael Strahan the record. In fact, if you go online and look at some YouTube videos, you can see Mark Gastineau confronting Brett Favre at an event and just accusing him of helping Michael Strahan steal his record. So it's a good thing that TJ Watt came along in 2021 and tied Michael Strahan with 22 and a half sacks for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That way, at least Mark Gastineau wouldn't have to worry about somebody stealing his record. TJ Watt got it legitimately. Whether Brett Favre helped out Michael Strahan, there's no way to know. Obviously, he's not going to confess to that. Maybe in a book someday. Who knows? If you're looking at the unofficial stats, though, after TJ Watt and Michael Strahan with their 22 and a half, Deacon Jones had two seasons in 1964 and 1968 when he had 22 sacks in a season. Incredible player. So those are your sack leaders. We'll look at some more here in a second. All right, let's look at the sack leaders for 2024. Trey Hendrickson for Cincinnati had 17 and a half sacks, which doesn't come anywhere near the season leaders all time, which, by the way, there are only 22 players that have had 20 or more sacks in a single season. For the active players, only Justin Houston in 2014 for Kansas City had 22, and TJ Watt had 22 and a half. Those are the only players that are active that had 20 or more. But looking back at 2024 season, Trey Hendrickson with his 17 and a half. Now, what's going to happen with him? Is he going to be a holdout for Cincinnati this coming year or not? Is a question mark at the point of this recording. We don't know. Number two was Myles Garrett, had 14. Quite a bit of a drop. In fact, there's only 17 players that had 10 or more sacks. Seems to me somewhat of a small number for a position that's everybody's just begging to find somebody who can get to the quarterback. Those are the sack leaders for 2024 and for all-time seasonally. Let's look at tackles for loss. Now, this is another category that is dominated by one particular person, and that's J.J. Watt. He has an incredible amount of tackles for loss in a single season. Now, this is a record that could be very difficult to break. He couldn't break it himself. In 2012, J.J. Watt had 39 tackles for loss. And what makes that impressive is he holds the position for second and third with 29 tackles for loss. 10 more tackles for loss than the second place position that he also holds. So he has number 1, 2, and 3. And he did that in 2012. He set the record. And then 2014 and 2015, he came back with 29 tackles for loss. Chandler Jones, though, somebody that's pushed J.J. Watt somewhat. In 2017, Chandler Jones for the Arizona Cardinals had 28 tackles for loss. That year, when J.J. Watt had 39 tackles for loss in 2012, he also had 20 and a half sacks and forced 4 fumbles. Very dominant. Such a dominant year for the Houston Texans that he played. So you do have two people, Chandler Jones, as I mentioned, and Von Miller. Both of them had 28 tackles for loss. Chandler Jones was more recent with his 20 in 2017. And then Von Miller had it the same 28 tackles for loss in 2012. You know, it's impressive because Chandler Jones, when he did it, he also had 17 sacks And when Miller had his 28 tackles for loss, he also had 18 and a half sacks. So very dominant seasons. TJ Watt, JJ Watt's brother, is tied for 10th with 23 tackles for loss, which he did in 2020. That's quite a combo. Imagine if they were both on the same team at the same time and both in their prime. That would have been something. So looking at tackles for loss in 2024, that was Myles Garrett had 22. Trey Hendrickson, who had the 17 and a half sacks and led the league, he had 19 tackles for loss. TJ Watt's back. As I said, he had 23 in 2020. He had 19 last year. Impressive. So Trey Hendrickson and TJ Watt both had 19. All right. Let's move on to the final category, and that is interceptions. Let's look at the interception leaders in a single season. This is going to be one of those records, as I've talked about interceptions already. I'm not sure it can be broken. It's held by Night Train Lane. Dick Night Train Lane in 1951 for the Rams had 14 interceptions. That is an incredible amount of interceptions. Lester Hayes in 1980 had 13 when he was playing for the Oakland Raiders. I remember him with his stickum, which they banned primarily because of him. But he has 13. So did Dan Sandifer in 1948 and Speck Sanders, who also had 13 interceptions in 1950. This list is dominated by people who didn't play anywhere earlier than 1980. And in fact, the first player who was an active player, Trevor Diggs, in 2021 had 11 interceptions. Xavier Howard, 2020, had 10. This year, and Kirby Joseph for Detroit Lions had 9 interceptions. He led the league over Xavier McKinney of Green Bay, who had 8. Then you had a few with 6 and a few with 5 and so forth. So 9 was the highest amount for 2024, which would place him tied for 78th on the all-time list. Night Train Lane is our leader in interceptions with 14 in 1952, a record that stood for 73 years and probably will stand for maybe another 70-something. We'll see. That's all our single season leaders. Next episode, we'll look at single game leaders, and you'll be interested to know that despite the pass-happy NFL of today, the record for most passing yards in a single game is still held by a person who set it 74 years ago. So stay tuned and find out who that player is. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you would subscribe to this podcast. I appreciate that. And continue to listen to Just the Stats NFL for more numbers that define football greatness. Thank you.